They came not with banners, but with bottle caps and brick fists. No club colors, no chants, just designer tracksuits, cold eyes, and a train ticket to anywhere the violence would be loudest. In the shadows of Ellen Road and across enemy terraces, they didn't just follow Leeds United, they hunted for chaos. This was the Leeds Service Crew, and for 2 decades they terrorized English football. In an era where firms battled for territory, fear, and notoriety, the Service Crew stood apart. Not the biggest, not always the loudest, but perhaps the most unpredictable. While police guarded the football specials, Leeds rode the public trains, unannounced, untraceable, unstoppable. From back alley pub ambushes to full-blown stadium invasions, their presence meant panic. To rival firms, they were wolves in Adidas stripes. To police forces, a moving nightmare. And to many inside Leeds, they were both a shame and a strange badge of honor. But to understand how the Leeds Service Crew became a name whispered in fear across England, we have to start where it all began, in the industrial heartbeat of West Yorkshire in 1974. Chapter 1. Leeds, 1974, a city built on coal smoke, steel, and stubborn pride. The football terraces were heaving with noise and fury, but something else was stirring beneath the chants and cigarette haze. Something sharper, more dangerous. That year, a new force emerged, not from the boardroom, not from the pitch, but from the streets. They called themselves the Leeds Service Crew. Unlike other firms that rode football specials, trains loaded with away fans and trailed by police, the Service Crew moved differently. They rode ordinary service trains, quietly, in small packs. No advance warnings, no firm arrival times. By the time word got out that Leeds were coming, they were already there. And they didn't just travel, they invaded. City pubs became staging grounds. The Scotsman, the Regent, the Nag's Head, the Snake Pit, all part of the crew's pre-match ritual. And when the whistle blew, they were ready. Not just for football, but for confrontation. The crew's rise wasn't just about fists and fear, it was about identity. In a fractured city among working-class youth with little to lose, being part of the crew meant power, protection, and purpose. But it didn't take long for their name to spread. By the early 80s, Leeds weren't just feared on the pitch, they were feared on every high street, platform, and pub across the country. And as the firm grew, so did the chaos, because next came war. Chapter 2. The late 1970s were a storm, and the Leeds Service Crew thrived in it. While English football teetered on the edge of collapse, plagued by financial ruin and collapsing terraces, a new battlefield emerged, the streets. And in that chaos, the Service Crew carved out their territory with speed, style, and sheer audacity. They weren't just a firm, they were a moving machine, splitting into smaller mobs, flanking police patrols, coordinating across train stations and pubs with precision that stunned even rival firms. While other crews marched as mobs, Leeds slipped in like shadows, then struck hard. 1975, Paris. Leeds fans rioted after a controversial European Cup final against Bayern Munich. Seats were torn from the stands, flares hurled onto the pitch. UEFA banned Leeds from European competition, the first English club ever to face such punishment. It wasn't just a loss, it was a warning shot to the continent. Leeds United didn't travel quietly. Then came Wolves in '77, Boxing Day. A brutal ambush in the South Bank saw the Service Crew overwhelmed by thousands of Wolves fans. Blood spilled, police lines shattered, and for one of the few times in their history, the crew was forced to retreat. It wouldn't happen often, but it left a scar. By '78, they were back with a vengeance. Manchester City came to Ellen Road and tried to take the Kop. Leeds responded by bricking coaches, ambushing fans, and turning the surrounding streets into a war zone. Same year, Birmingham. Missiles rained down, 15 arrests. Riot police lost control, and Leeds made their mark in fire and chaos. They traveled in thousands, 8,000 away at Swansea in '81. The Jacks tried to ambush them in small groups, but Leeds had numbers. Leeds had hunger, and Leeds almost burned the Swansea double-decker stand to the ground. By now, the name Service Crew was infamous. It meant unpredictability, brutality, and precision. Wherever Leeds went, fear followed. Fans, firms, and even the police knew. You could stop chants, you could cancel trains, but you couldn't stop the crew from coming. And in 1982, they came to London, not for football, but for blood. Chapter 3. October 19th, '82. London was tense. Word had spread. Leeds were coming south and they weren't coming quietly. The service crew had been gathering momentum for years, and this time, they were heading to Stamford Bridge. But it wouldn't be the match that made headlines. It was what happened beneath the streets. 2 weeks earlier, Leeds lads had clashed with Chelsea fans in Glasgow during England versus Scotland. Words were exchanged, warnings issued, and now revenge was promised. At dawn, 500 service crew boarded service trains to the capital. No colors, no chanting, just a mob in designer wear. Eyes locked on one goal, Stamford Bridge. They took Trafalgar Square first, clashing with Chelsea groups outside pubs like the Cockney Pride and Snows. Police quickly rounded up over 100 Leeds fans and rerouted them toward Charing Cross Station. But a second wave of the service crew, that's around 150 strong, headed for Piccadilly Station. What they didn't know was that Chelsea had been watching. Spotters had clocked the Leeds movement, and as the Yorkshire firm descended the escalators, the Chelsea headhunters arrived, a full mob, armed, waiting. What followed was mayhem. Bottles, blades, chains. Men slashed, heads cracked, bodies thrown onto train tracks. Some Leeds fans ran into the tunnels to escape, others stood their ground. It was 5 minutes of carnage before the police arrived, and when they did, they arrested only the Leeds firm. Chelsea were allowed to walk. Across town, the second Leeds mob, just released from Charing Cross, were ambushed again, this time at Embankment Station. Chelsea struck fast, driving the service crew into the streets in a running battle that only ended when riot squads stormed in. Leeds never even made it to kickoff. During the match itself, what was left of the crew stood their ground in the East Stand. Chelsea invaded the pitch trying to reach them. Arrests continued long after the final whistle. In total, over 200 arrests, dozens injured, several stabbed. The press called it the Bloody Battle of Platform 4. Both sides claimed victory. Leeds held their own despite being outnumbered and outflanked. Chelsea claimed dominance. What's certain is this: the day cemented a rivalry born not from football, but from blood, concrete, and a hatred that would echo for years. But this wasn't the end of Leeds' reign, it was only the beginning of something darker. Because what came next would leave bodies on the ground. Chapter 4. After Piccadilly, there was no more denying it. The Leeds service crew weren't just a firm, they were a force, and the 1980s would become their battlefield. Every away day was a potential war zone, and everywhere they went, the body count rose. In 1982, they descended on Grimsby, tearing through Cleethorpes the night before the match, drinking, robbing, and fighting in the streets. 600 strong. Police were overwhelmed, locals shocked. Leeds didn't come to watch a game, they came to leave a message. That same year, West Bromwich Albion. Leeds fans hurled bottles and bricks until the perimeter fence at the Hawthorns gave way. The pitch was stormed. Police battered back the tide, but one lifelong Baggies supporter would later say, "It was the first time in 37 years I saw full-scale fighting outside the ground, and I've never been more afraid at a match in my life." In Swansea, 1981, 8,000 Leeds fans made the trip and lit up the city in flames. Jack's firms tried to ambush small Leeds mobs, but were outnumbered, outpaced. The crew fought back, and at one point even tried to burn down the double-decker stand at Vetch Field. But nothing compared to Birmingham, 1985, May 11th. Leeds visited St Andrews on the final day of the season. What started as a football match turned into a massive riot, one of the worst in English football history. A wall collapsed under the weight of panicked fans. A 14-year-old boy was killed. Over 100 police officers injured. Bricks, barriers, bottles. It wasn't a firm-on-firm fight, it was chaos, uncontained. One judge later said the scenes resembled the Battle of Agincourt. The tragedy shook football, but the service crew kept moving. In 1986, they stormed Bradford, less than a year after the stadium fire that killed 56. Leeds fans rioted again. Fights broke out across the ground. A chip van was flipped and set ablaze. There was no respect, no pause, just violence. By now, the service crew weren't just known, they were feared. Feared by firms, feared by police, feared by their own club, who began to lose control of what they had helped unleash. And yet, there was no stopping them. Not yet. But with blood on their hands and the country watching, the walls were closing in. And in the 1990s, the crackdowns began. Chapter 5. By the early 1990s, the game was changing, and the service crew could feel it. What once looked like invincibility now came with consequences. The government had taken notice. So had the FA, and more importantly, so had the police. Surveillance teams were formed, spotters trained, firms were infiltrated, and new laws handed down football banning orders like parking fines. In 1990, Leeds were back in the top flight after beating Bournemouth on the final day of the season. But the celebrations turned into carnage. Town centre bars were smashed, police were attacked, over 100 arrests, dozens injured. For many, it was the last straw. That same year, a clash at Main Road saw 500 service crew attempt to storm Manchester City's home end. The result? 4-match fan ban, a sign of what was to come. Every major incident brought heavier restrictions. CCTV in and outside stadiums, travel restrictions, intelligence-led policing. The very tactics that once made the service crew dangerous, stealth, coordination, mobility, were now being used against them. The arrests piled up, banning orders were handed out in bulk. Police forces began working together, and slowly, the firm began to thin out. Chapter 6. By the 2000s, the terraces were quieter. The pubs still packed, but the boots lighter. Football had become safer, or at least more polished. But beneath the surface, the stories lingered, about the service crew, about what they were, about what they left behind. Some remember them as monsters, yobs in designer clothes fueled by booze and tribal hate. Others remember them as tacticians, the firm that outwitted cops, outmaneuvered rivals, and made every away day feel like enemy territory. They were never the largest, never the most public, but they were clinical, purposeful, calculated, and that's what made them terrifying. Even rival firms, like from the headhunters to the bushwhackers, knew Leeds weren't bluffing. They didn't show up for the cameras, they showed up for the chaos, and most of the time, they delivered it. Their tactics, using regular trains, moving in small mobs, attacking from angles police never saw coming, would change how hooligan firms operated across England. And while many of the service crew's worst days ended in blood, arrests, and bans, their reputation refused to die. In books, in forums, in pubs, in whispered tales passed down like war stories. The Leeds Service Crew became legend, a firm born from the terraces, forged in smoke, stone, and steel, and remembered, rightly or wrongly, as one of the most feared firms English football ever saw. The Leeds Service Crew didn't just follow a football club, they carved their name into the dark side of the game. Feared, hunted, remembered. This was their story, one of chaos, control, and legacy. If you want more stories from football's most dangerous era, subscribe. The next firm could be even more brutal.